Hello, everyone. Hi, how's it going today? I am Devana Robity, and I have lost my script for some reason. So give me just 1 second to get that pulled back up so that I can begin our program here. Of course, it completely goes away the minute I go to do this. So if you just give me one moment. There it is. Okay, so now I can do our introductions and our housekeeping and all of our stuff here. So hi, sorry about that little blip. My name is Devana Robity. I'm here representing the Schweinfurth Art Center. The Schweinfurth is a multi-art center with exhibitions, workshops, community events in Auburn, New York. The Schweinfurth Art Center hosts many fiber art related exhibitions and programs. Including the annual Quilting by the Lake Conference, Quilts equals Art equals Quilts exhibition, and Studio Schweinfurth workshops. And this week we are hosting through the Surface Design Association. We're taking their guest spot. So thank you to them. I am delighted to welcome you to this week's Beyond the Surface exhibition, Contemporary Artists and Printed Textile Talk. Textile Talk webinars are brought to you by the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and the Surface Design Association. So just the housekeeping announcements. This is what I needed our script for. Your screens and mics are not showing. We welcome questions, which we'll answer at the end of all of the artist presentations. So please submit them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. We're honored to bring you free and inspiring Textile Talk programmings. We just respectfully ask that you be courteous as you engage with the speakers, the moderators, the other participants. Your chat comments can be seen by everyone. So once again, use the Q&A box. It's at the bottom. It's different from the chat. So be sure to put in your questions and we'll get to them at the end. If you prefer not to see notifications from the chat, you can click on the chat button and toggle them on and off. So today we're seeing 3 artists, Emily Dormier, Krystle Lemonias, and Sarah Fairchild are going to talk about their work on view in the Beyond the Surface Contemporary Artists and Printed Textiles exhibition at the Schweinfurth Art Center, and it was curated by Caroline Kipp. So using various techniques and materials, these artists transform fabric-based prints into meditations on personal, political, and social conditions. Their work expands notions of what a printed textile is and can be within a fine art context. And it reveals possibilities for conceptual expression and meaning that uniquely exist in the overlap of the media. And Beyond the Surface, each artist delves into the nuances of their conceptual and material concerns, richly contributing to an exhibition wide dialogue about printed textiles as an expansive mode of contemporary arts practice. So our first artist is Emily Dormier. Emily, if you go ahead and turn on your camera. Emily is an interdisciplinary fiber and print-based artist in the Midwest. She received her BFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago in 2022. Born and raised in New Jersey, Emily's childhood love of stitchwork first drew her to fibers and later sparked a passion towards the intersection between image and textile. She studied at Oxbow School of Art, artist residencies, and is returning to the Midwest to receive her MFA in fibers from Cranbrook Academy of Art after completing a 3-month apprenticeship at the Fabric Workshop Museum in Philadelphia. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Open in the slideshow. Okay, there we go. Hello, everybody. So my work in this exhibition explores the fallibility of memory, and I try to create tangible expressions of the moments between reality and the remembered. Every time we remember something, it's colored by our emotions at the time we're remembering it, influenced by our varied maturity, a sense of nostalgia. Though it feels static and consistent, memory is much more ephemeral than we like to think. It stretches and it transforms with the slightest influence. There's so many times where I'm positive I remember something correctly. Yeah, that definitely happened in summer. I remember, going swimming at that time. But then I see a photograph with snow on the ground, and I can almost feel the shift in my mind as it corrects itself. Or the inventing of a memory surrounding a photograph, something that you don't recall at all until you see the image and then sort of build a scene around that. Print is usually a medium that's associated with perfect replication. Using proper registration and proper technique, you have the ability to create something very precise over and over again with exactly the same results. I, however, use it as a way to ground these sort of elusive and abstract concepts of the mind and mirror how easily a single image or a thought can be transformed or varied. In this first work, Vividly Forgetting, I created image collages from 4 photographs of the same area near where I grew up in New York. This process of collage and digital manipulation pushed them away from reality and into almost fantastical scenes. The act of revisiting the same space made the place blur together in my mind. Different trips, different hikes, all coming together to give me a set of memories that are probably pretty far from what actually happened, but are the only thing remaining of the experience. I then used CMYK processes to take each digital image collage, break them into 4 different images, each with their own set of color information. I could then take each of those 4, expose them onto a silk screen, and then translate them to fabric by printing with blue, red, yellow, and black ink. This method of color separation also provided a color structure that I could easily vary. I began taking each image and shuffling what color ink was in each screen to make representations of how easily a single memory or experience can shift each time it's recalled. Though they were misremembered and over-idealized, printed with bright colors and different variations, I still view each of these as discrete events, moments where I can look up a time and a date and find photographs to corroborate what I recall of that day. Moving forward in my practice, though, I began starting to understand this concept in reference to larger memories, not just places as a subject matter, but things like a sense of home. When you think of home, there isn't one single moment you can pick out, a specific time when a space transformed into what you consider home. Thinking about it is almost an overwhelming blur of your continuous experiences and relationships in this place, coming together to give a sense of comfort and belonging. This installation is all-encompassing. It's about 550-ish square feet of brightly colored print surrounding and engulfing you, printed in varied repetition to create a continuous land and cityscape. Now, though, as you travel across each row, you see not only color variations, but as you look from top to bottom, there's also recognizable decay in the image quality. One of my favorite ways to describe memory is as cannibalizing. Every time you remember something, you're introducing new faults and inventing details that get folded in and carried along until the next time you access that memory. There's no way to engage with memory without destroying it. But the mind is all that we are, and our past experiences are what create a sense of self and our understanding of the world. So you have to engage with it. There's no other choice. For this installation, I collaged images from 2 places that I've considered home in my life. The first being where I grew up in New Jersey, surrounded by nature and woods, and the second, Chicago, the city I moved to for school that I was living right in the heart of. Again, I strayed away from photorealism, instead creating these almost dreamlike scapes. The memories that were captured through the eyes of a child were slightly absurd, probably partially imagined, and those of the city I recognized first as so bright and exciting when I moved there. But through the monotony of the everyday, the repeated commuting, seeing the same buildings over and over again, you get desensitized to it. I recognize details less and less, everything blurring together into the sense of almost a solid wall of architectural details. Windows, straight lines, reflections from the glass, things that I could pick out individually, but not necessarily give a place in a specific location. I then screen printed each of these onto fabric and took high-resolution scans of the prints. I then took those now digital images. So I had the original collage, I screen printed it onto fabric, and then I scanned it to make it a digital image again, and screen printed that new image onto fabric, took high-resolution scans of that, and repeated this process. I repeated this process, printing and scanning and reprinting until the elements transformed from realistic and recognizable into almost just fields of color with vaguely identifiable shapes. The translation from the digital to the physical over and over again continues to introduce and accentuate flaws and misprints. Digitally, it's decaying from the process of halftoning a halftone. So creating matrices of dots to create something photorealistic over the matrices of dots from the previous print, mirroring the decay from photographs that we have in our mind, and photographs' inability to capture the full sense of a three-dimensional scene with sounds and smells, only being able to create this 2D digital structure that we have in our records as files or photos. Physically, the stretch of the fabric as I printed it and as I pinned it, the way the dot of the image sits on the weave of the fabric, like the decay within your own mind, shifting just from the process of remembering and just the process of printing onto fabric. And of course, the human element. There were 32 screens used in this process. So if I didn't wash out a screen completely or had slightly uneven pressure in while pulling one of the prints, my registration was a little bit off. Or in one case where the person working on the light table before me left a drop of water on the shared exposure unit, almost like how memories decay from storytelling. Hearing a friend's recollection of the same event interacts with your memory of it and changes it. All of that gets saved by the scan of that print and carried over into the next one. This process allows me to impose these multiple structures of decay onto the imagery in a similar way to how memory slowly breaks down. Within our perception, memories don't fade or yellow the way a photograph does. Even though we're constantly misremembering and losing detail, we still feel as if we can recall the original memory as vividly as we once did, even if that pattern of vibrancy holds so little resemblance to the original occurrence. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. All right, so next we have Krystle. Krystle Lemonias is an interdisciplinary visual artist, labor activist, and art educator. She had a solo exhibition titled "You Can Catch Quacky, You Can Catch Him Shut" with Andrew Rathke's gallery, and has been exhibited at Bloom and Poe in the Show Me the Signs exhibition for the hashtag Say Her Name campaign. Her work is shown in the Unblocked Improvisation and Identity in Contemporary Quilts at the Hunterdon Museum of Art, and in Make America What America Must Become exhibition at the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans. Her multidisciplinary art practice is primarily influenced by her research on social class, privilege, citizenship, labor rights, and how economic inequality affects Black communities. Found materials, fabric, and iconography are used to communicate these themes. She sees her work as a tool to encourage this population's education of Black immigrant cultural identity and its connection to the broader diaspora. She acquired a BFA in printmaking from New Jersey City University in 2018 and an MFA in 2022 at the University of South Florida. She now holds the role of Assistant Professor of Interdisciplinary Art at Rowan University and is the co-host of the Hidden Critique podcast. Welcome, Krystle.
Hello, everyone. Oop, I shared the wrong one. One moment. There we go. All righty. Hello, everyone. My practice is very interested in using what we have as a part of the consumer world that we live in, and thinking about this as a material in making. And so this saying that I have here, await maga pop. So you're going to learn a little bit of patois today. And in Jamaica, this direct translation is anywhere it's thin, it will break. Used in situations to describe being forced to make do with very little. And when it's done, it's done. This is what leads to my practice. So here I'm going to show a bit of my past work and share a lot about what the work that is at the Schweinfurth Art Center and the exhibition. So this work began as being challenged to experiment in experimental painting class in undergrad at New Jersey City University. This pushed me to think, how could I create a painting without paint? Upon completion of this piece, Portrait of the Past and the Present, I felt that I was starting to kind of tap into something about identity and thinking about consumer goods, all the various experiences that we have and how it makes up ourselves and how we think of one's identity and or place in society. Here in this piece is where I really started to think of iconography using Adinkra symbols, which are seen in the background, Sankofa, and then the hair comb, thinking about the past and thinking about one's position in how they think about the future, and then utilizing shirts from various experiences as a 5K runner or participating in various organizations. How does that make up one's thought of who they are as a person? And so my use of non-precious materials and repurposed objects point to the excess consumption that capitalism produces. It devours people, natural resources in its path. I find creative opportunities in the excess of our society. So in the works that you'll see in the exhibition, I am using baby clothes from the subjects, which is my mom, her work as a nanny, the children that she cared for, the clothes that she would wash and put them in as young children, and the clothes that they would wear to play to the playground. I see these materials as being these places to talk about who we are, the brands that we wear that position us in a certain class status, the food that we eat, utilizing packaging, food packaging as this way to also express the things that we consume, and just the fact that they're not precious, but then are created to be precious in the creation of making an art piece. Here, through a personal and intimate format, my art practice tells the stories of women's labor. And so I think a lot about the work of caregivers, those that are nannies, watching my mom as a nanny come to the United States and do this work and think about how her position in society has shifted in often or past presidents has shared that, the worst comes to the United States, but more often there's lots of resources that it takes to make this big jump. And so I want to create the scenes of how one comes from a society where they may have had many accesses to various funds and affordability, but that shifts in the American context. And what does that look like here? Often they start as caregivers and find ways to go to school or get a certificate or do something to move up in financial earning in our society. And so my fascination stems from my father, who actually was a labor rights minister in Jamaica, and his work in thinking about how women's maternity how women, when they are on maternity leave, and if they have maternity leave, they are better participants in our society and further have the space to then go back to the work world if they choose to, feeling so much more refreshed and having the time to also spend with children. And so in Jamaica, he was able to pass the first Maternity Leave Act. Some of the research that he did contributed to that. And so in this piece that I'm showing here, I've started to merge how my interest in care work, utilizing clothes again from the families that my mom worked with, and printmaking merges to create this very dynamic push and pull in the typography, in the figure as well as in the background. here I started to really think of spatial design as well as focusing on my subject and thinking about how it interacts with the child in the scene. And so the use of patois dialect, satire, repurposed materials, it helps me to think of centering my culture as a Jamaican, and including children's clothes helps me to also think about how this friction is in the workspace. Often I poke fun of capitalism and the structures that we live in, how absurd that some of the experiences that we have in our workplace is. And my dialect is a way of doing so. So most of Jamaicans are, we grew up in a country that is, most people are employed in service work. So cleaners, seamstress, farmers, and many other jobs, often having meager salaries. So I focus a lot on how one thinks about the idea of the quote unquote upward mobility and how that shifts and changes in the US context. A little bit about my process. I catalog all the garments that I come across and are using in a particular body of work. So I am often listing all my greens, all my oranges, all my reds, and so on and so forth, and using that as a basis as a palette, as a painter would. And so when I am creating patterns, as you can see in the image on the right, you'll see D, G, W, P, and all of this is connecting to the palette that is on the left. And once the fabric is pinned, I am then sewing all these parts together as one would collage rather than quilt. So it's a hybrid of the two. Here's a little bit more about the patterning. On the left, you'll see an image that has been drawn, and I have fully created the pattern, just ready for cutting all the little pieces of fabric that will come together and create the entire figure. I'm in this stage, I'm also planning where I will be registering the plates for the blocks for wood block printing, and how I will have various tonalities in an image. On the right is a block that I would have prepared and I'm cutting to then print in a specific section that I have identified. In the show, this piece, America Sun Different E, it shows how I am playing with the printed image and the very fully fabricated individual, and how together they still create a very harmonious combination. Lastly, this image is not included in the show, but I thought it gave a good example as to how I am utilizing three-dimensionality in some areas. In this image on the right corner, you can see a bit more volume that protrudes from the two-dimensional composition. And so I think a lot about how sculpturally I can create more emphasis and definition by adding a three-dimensional component in the work. And so that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Krystle. Okay, next we have Sarah Fairchild. Sarah is a mixed media artist based in Jersey City, New Jersey. She currently splits her time between her studios in Long Island City, New York, and the Catskills. Sarah received her BFA from Columbus College of Art and Design in Columbus, Ohio. She is currently represented by Contemporary Art Matters Gallery in Columbus, Ohio. Sarah recently attended the Vermont Studio Center Artist Residency in Johnson, Vermont. Publications include New American Paintings, International Painting Annual, and her work is included in various public and private collections. Sarah is a multimedia artist deeply concerned about our environment, creating and representing natural forms through a synthetic lens. She embraces the ancient concept of animi mundi, referring to the existence of a world soul, a spirit inside of nature, and the intrinsic connection between all living things.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Devana, for the introduction. Let me share my screen. Great. First, I want to thank the Schweinfurth for making this possible and Caroline for including me and the exhibition and the catalog. I'm super excited to be a part of this. So this work is titled Toronto. This represents the landscape surrounding my studio and cabin in the Catskills. It's basically a literal translation of the landscape, which you'll see in a minute. I'm deeply concerned about our environment and keeping our wild spaces wild. I'll have additional slides I really want to show you my process. It's really hard to there's so many different facets, so I'll get into that. I must state how limiting photography is for my work. The surfaces are extremely metallic, they're fluorescent, they're chromatic, they're velvet, they're bedazzled, and they're extremely shiny. Color is extremely important to my work, but I can't talk about color without addressing light. Light is extremely important to the viewer's experience of the work, as well as the viewer's interpretation of light, depending upon how and where they observe the work. The light will change depending on how the viewer moves throughout the gallery and as they change their position. The metallics reflect and refract light, while the flocked surfaces absorb light. I also think color allows us to bring an ordinary object and make it extraordinary or bring a different attention to it. But I like when you're in nature and how you stumble across things as if by accident, things hide in plain sight. So I like to play with that concept in my work. It's very maximalist, so there's a lot of stuff going on, sort of like the leaves in the forest, but if you look close, there's something to discover. So you'll come across snakes, spiders, butterflies, birds, insects, you name it. So in this panel, the pine branches are flocked, and flocking is basically nylon fibers that are electrostatically charged and then shot onto the surface, an adhesive surface. You can go onto my website or my Instagram and you'll be able to find videos if you want more information. But flocking connects my love of surface, vintage design, etc. This next slide, I have you can see here, I'm trying to show you how I build up the surface over time. So here you can kind of see that I'm working with, especially on the left, a traditional landscape approach where you work background to foreground, sort of large swaths of color. And then in the right slide, getting a little bit more space with overlap with the screen printing. I think of screen printing as a painting tool. As Emily suggested, I do not care about registration. If accidents happen, I work with them. So here you have the black silhouettes, and the black ink that I'm printing has a tiny bit of adhesive in it. So when it dries, it has a little stick, which allows me to take a textile foil, which is similar to like a mylar. I place it onto the black ink. I use a hot iron or heat press. Here, because they're so large, I have to use an iron. But you need a little heft, so it's a little bit of a workout, and you heat set the textile foil onto the surface, and then you lift it, and the textile color will only connect to where the ink was present. So you can see the horizon line on the right, or on the left, and on the right, you can see I'm building up those layers. And then here, this is my work surface. I'm further along in the process when you're seeing this image, but you can see that I have printed patterns on fabric that I'm ready to cut out or sew onto the surface. Sometimes I sew, sometimes I'm collage with glue, but right now it's about looking and responding, testing and trying. My process is extremely messy and a little bit violent. And I only say it's violent because it's a real physical process. I'm burnishing, I'm scraping, I'm cutting, I'm sewing. So it's all about exploration and experimentation. And I never have a plan. I sort of jump right in and I allow each step to inform the next. And then this is a detail of the center panel of Toronto, and you can see the fawn. There's a little wrinkle a bit at the top, so you can see that it's three-dimensional and it's stuffed with Amazon packaging materials. I like how I can hide refuse or trash behind a beautiful facade. And as I mentioned before, like hiding that trash in plain sight. So not only are you discovering the beautiful things in plain sight, I'm hiding the trash behind something beautiful, but it's right there. You'll also notice the painted lines. The painted lines to me represent sort of the aura or the being of the object, that energy. And I use it in a lot of my work. Here you just have some images of the printed butterflies on fabric with the textile foils, and I've sewn the Amazon packaging to the back, and then I'll sew them onto the surfaces of the panel or work. This piece is new for me. It's I have two from the series in the show. It's called Pollinators and Poke Milkweed. I wanted to use tulle. Well, tulle to me represents femininity, sexuality, sensuality, power, childlike femininity, freedom, the ballet. There's so many things that it brings, but I also feel like I'm wanting to activate my work in a different way. I had mentioned the line around the fawn. I almost feel like the tulle is that energy or aura around the panel. So I've always thought of my work as interior and exterior. It's interior because it's about decoration, it's about ornamentation, it's about surface. It's exterior because it's based in the landscape. Again, I try to emphasize ignored common forms. So here on the panel and the background is printed the Poke Milkweed. It's a half drop repeat that then I've screen printed spiders and butterflies and spider webs. Show you the detail. So here we have some details. On the right, you can see we have the flocked butterfly, which is also stuffed with packaging material and sewn onto the surface, but I've left the thread behind, and I really like how the loose threads mimic the printed spider webs. The thread and the sewn surfaces in all my work is about mark making, or the thread becoming a mark. And if you look close, again, hard to photograph, there are crystals on the spider web to mimic dew. And then on the left, excuse me, my right and left, on the right, you can see the edge and that it is a wallpaper panel, but I was trying to, play with that concept. And then here I have a work called Purple Cabbage Roses. I have 3 works from this series in the show. This plant started off, the inspiration were the thorns, again, they often ignored. So this entire series started with just the thorns. And then as I printed the thorns on the fabric and started cutting them out, I decided I wanted to play with what I could put on top of those thorns. So I started experimenting with the roses and the other forms of those plants, the buds, the blooms, the rose hips, the leaves, etc. Plants to me have always been portals. Plants are portals to memory, time, and people. So when I think of plants, I have a Rolodex of images in my head from being a small child to current day. So I am also playing with memory in my work. And here you have a studio shot of hundreds of roses and thorns that I'm playing as I assemble these work. It's sort of a tedious little process, but I'm printing, just to kind of explain how, I'm basically taking a screen print and I'm printing adhesive of the silhouette of let's say it's the rose blossom on black fabric. I then let that cure under a convection dryer, 350 degrees. The adhesive dries. I then put the textile foil on it. I either iron or heat set it. I pull it off. I have the silhouette of the rose, which then I can print on top of or decide what to do with. I then cut it out, and then I have something to collage or sew with. And then this is just the gallery view. So if for those of you who can't be here, you can see it here. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. If all of our panelists could turn your cameras on, we're going to enter into the Q&A section. And I know I didn't actually prep you guys for this, so feel free to you know, but whatever the audience doesn't know is these artists were at the Art Center and they've done a panel already, and so we've talked a lot about their work. And I was wondering if you guys had any questions for one another about each other's practice, because we've heard, you know, you talking to one another a lot. If you don't, I'll move on to the questions I have prepared. I'll move on into the other questions, but do you guys have any questions for one another?
I have one.
Yeah.
I think an ongoing challenge as an artist is always to grow in your practice. And so I'm curious how both Emily and Sarah continue to find ways and places for growth in their practice.
You want to start? My dog's just going crazy in the background, so I'm just keeping
Okay.
my mic muted when I'm not speaking.
Okay, I'll start. You know, that's interesting. I feel like I'm constantly experimenting and trying new things and inevitably wasting a lot of time. So I always feel like I just have to keep going and keep going and keep going. But I think it's just about constant visual information and then following the energy of what really pops, but it's always about curiosity to me.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I think a lot of what drives me to keep going and keep innovating is really a love of process and making. And the more I work with programs like Photoshop and trying to understand how color information between people and computers sort of can go back and forth is always giving me something new I want to try. I love teaching this process, and any time I teach somebody how to do it, whether it be Photoshop, CMYK printing, repeat printing, they always ask a question that makes me think, I wonder if we could do that. It kind of keeps me going in that way.
What about you, Krystle? How do you keep growing?
Yeah, I think for me, it's similar to both of you. The process of making things and potentially failing or whatever I consider of not necessarily of the best of what I want, and then having conversations with people. So meeting care workers, meeting other laborers. I think my practice always starts in a kind of an ethnographic place where the story and the narrative is where it begins, and then the visual parts come together like after I figure out how I understand the story.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Okay, so I have a bunch of questions. I have notes. So for Emily, I noticed in talking about your work through the past whole weekend, you use a lot of computer language to talk about memory, which is so interesting because we have this digital age coming on us, getting forced on us with AI. And the concept of like human computer processing. And I've read lots of articles about the processing power of the human brain. And so we're having these, like, we have a lot of language that's connecting us to this sort of other, and you're running your artwork, the imagery of your artwork through these computer processes and CMYK, and you're filtering them through, and you even refer to your memories at one point as files in our records. So I just wanted you to expand on that part of your work a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think memory at this point, especially for me, is inexplicably, or, cannot be separated from photograph. Not only because, we constantly have our phones now and can just take a picture and, do you remember we did this that one time? And you can scroll back, search by location, find a day, and immediately have photographic proof of what happened or an event. That, however, is still going to create something, it's a two-dimensional snapshot of something. You can't feel the emotion of it. You can't see the space of it. You can't smell it. There was so much more to it than just this one photograph. But to us, that feels like, the end all. Oh, look, I have the photo of it. That's what happened. And prior to that, everything existed in your mind. So if you forget something, misremember something, that is the only record you have of it. So collectively, I don't know, and this is part of what I'm exploring, where the human mind is going to go when we no longer are straining to remember things because we just have everything recorded. We just have photographs of it, we have videos of it, and we have, perfect replications and proof of what occurred, but losing the human element of that so far. So if collectively our memory is going to kind of fade in the same way, people are not as good as math at math anymore because we could just pull out a calculator and do that. Is that what's going to start happening to our brains as we continue to just have more and more technology? So it's a question. So something I'm always exploring.
Yeah. Are you nostalgic for a time before, or are you just contending with it or do you feel like, there's going to be some hope? Are you hopeful? Are you?
Yeah, I think it's not
hesitant?
something that I'm dreading in any way. I think we're still
Okay.
coming up with new and exciting ways to experience things. Now, even for the exhibition in the museum, somebody's going to come in and do the recording with cameras so you can essentially walk through the exhibition and see everything. We're going to have great records of things. This can lead to so much further understanding, and so many great things. It's not nostalgia for, oh, we have no records of that. It's just how can we keep our minds agile and excited about remembering and keep it beyond just like two-dimensional representations.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. My next question is for Krystle. I wanted to talk a little bit about your approach to labor, and the layers of labor that you sort of add on. So you start with this process of like collecting, and that seems to be a labor. And then you do this process of categorizing, which is a separate layer. And then you do the drawing, which then gets destroyed and turned into the fiber art, which is a whole nother type of labor. And then you are wood cutting, making wood block cuts and printing on top of that. And then then the whole thing you're representing is like a person who is laboring. And I just wanted you to expand a little bit about like how you feel when you're doing this process. Like, does the process have to be so labored for you in order to produce these images of the laborer?
That's a very good question. I don't think I've thought of it so explicitly that way. I think in some ways I would say yes, because I feel to create the essence of the experience that I'm trying to essentially extract from these materials and present and have viewers contemplate with. To me, it feels like it kind of has to feel laborious. It has to feel well handled and in some ways, like I've rummaged through all these things to come to this point. I feel that for me, it helps me to get to that point also, to have done this process that's it allows me to engage a lot with people. For instance, even coming to the opening on Saturday for the exhibition, someone's always offering me fabric. It's like, oh, I see you do this. I have this used stuff I haven't, got a chance to use. And so I love this like community aspect that comes from the collecting and the stories that are passed on in this also the story behind their fabric and how I can in some ways incorporate that into the piece. And so sometimes I'll hold on to a piece of fabric for a while until it feels like, from the story I remember and the story that I have noted, what it will be suitable for.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about my labor as this integral component in contemplating my mother's labor or other care workers' labor, it feels like I am in essence recreating the circumstance to come to the point of which I'm showing their experiences and potential contemplation while they work.
Yeah. What is it about? Is there a certain quality that a story needs to have for it to catch you, for you to want to, pursue a body of work on it, or maybe just a singular piece? Like, what is it that's worth your labor?
Mm, so oftentimes I kind of look at well, having having conversations with someone over time where I in some ways I build a rapport relationship in how they work, how they do their work, whether it seems so subtle in that in some ways their work seems understated and misunderstood, or their labor seems invisible, or they may have a big personality. So for instance, my mother has a big personality in her work, and so that captures me. And in or even just and then they may share images with me of, this is how I do what I do, this is what my day is like. Once I start to have such an intimate exposure to someone's experience, that's kind of what gets me going. And kind of think of it kind of like an essay where I'm like, all the images is like the introduction, and then I'm like creating all these points of entry that investigates various experiences on a given day, or it could be over a span of a year or more.
Yeah. Okay. All right, my next one is for Sarah. Looking at your work, I'm really interested in knowing your personal perspective on beauty. Like, what is it that you find beautiful? Because your surfaces are just so much, and they're gorgeous. But you've added like so many, like you're saying, they're shiny, they're soft, they're sparkly, they're this. So I'm interested in like, how do you apply your beauty standards to your work? What do you find beautiful? What is it that's drawing you in? And then how do you choose colors and surfaces and motifs? Like, what is that like for you?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Sorry.
There's a lot there, but I'll try to break it down, because beauty is like, it's the basis of all of my work. But I think first and foremost, it's about the forms that I see and what I'm attracted to. And I've always been attracted to the weeds. The dandelion growing through a crack in a sidewalk seems more beautiful than sometimes a flower in a vase. Like, it's more interesting, it has more grit or something. So there's usually sort of this masculine feminine quality that comes together for something that I find beautiful. It's strong, but it's also delicate. So there's a nice something there. But I do find that I tend to focus on items that just pop. They're just right there and I can't get them out of my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the second part of your question was it about surface? Was it about color?
Surface and color, yeah. So you've got form,
Yeah.
you've got, yeah, these tensions,
Yeah.
but you have these textures.
They're, like I could sit down and try to paint Queen Anne's lace and keep it white. But I've always wanted to sort of I want it to be more interesting. So I want to explore, what would it look like if it was fluorescent pink? What would it look like if that little tiny center of the Queen Anne's lace was a crystal rather than that little purple flower? Like a way to kind of change the perspective.
Okay.
And then the color, I mean, when I found textile foils, my mind blew up, because, you have 100 different colors. They're all metallic, they're all shiny, and I had to figure out how to start using them. So
Can you tell us a little bit more about the tension? Because this phrase you said really got me. The tension between decor and ornament and the landscape, because you're like, they're landscapes, but they're decor. So
yeah,
can you talk a little bit more about that?
I'll try. I've always been deeply interested in surface design and pattern design and fashion. And, I can think of Odilon Redon and some of those beautiful paintings, Bonnard. Anyway, that tension, it's basically like you know, Shinasawe, I can never say the word, but the vintage wall murals that have seemed to come back in style again. They're
Yes.
also landscape and their ornament and their decoration. And in a way, my paintings are those, except they're individual objects.
Yeah.
And I've done wallpapers and I've done installations and I actually love them. But it's that tension between, you know, also flat and
Mhm.
dimensional. Like, because
Yeah.
I'm trying to push that a little with some three-dimensionality. And then the flocking is also topographical. It's soft, it's velvet. You kind of want to touch it. There's a push and pull that way as well.
Yeah, it's exciting to me for artists to be talking about decor because I feel like we've poo-pooed, especially women's, you know, response to decor or a woman's sensibility to like shiny and that bedazzled component. And we want to, you know, denigrate that a little as decor, but landscape is, you know, often used in home decor.
Yeah.
But then is like a higher art form. So I love that notion that this tension that it can be ornamental, it can be landscape, and like it can be decorative, but fine, you know, high end fine art. I love that. So we're kind of running out of time here, but I did want to get to some of the questions in the chat here. I had a question for Krystle about your work reminds Amy Wade of Faith Ringgold, and has Faith influenced your growth in the media?
I would say tangentially. I can't say that actively I'm constantly looking at her work for strategic ways of making, but I think just because she's just such a, I mean, an immense presence in fiber, you can't help but being influenced in some capacity subconsciously. So I would say yes, in some ways, maybe how I am kind of collaging fabric. I'm getting very experimental in ways, but I would say that, or the different factors that she focuses a little bit more on painting and also as a quilter, and those are things that I do think of the structure of painting, but I don't use paint, and I'm not really quilting. So I think those would be the differences.
Another person, Maggie Bushaw, said, Emily, do you produce your own digital images on fabric, or do you send it out to be done? But I'm assuming you're screening them.
Yeah, so I don't actually do any digital printing like from a, you know, computer printer. It's all hand screen printed. So I just have massive silk screens that I lay down on my fabric. I pull ink across and just keep going down the line and do it for all 4 layers for the CMYK.
Yeah. And then there's a longer question, but I want each of you guys to get a chance to answer it. It's an artist who is talking about questioning their choice to be a printmaker. And each of you are kind of like living on sort of the edge of printmaking and textiles and like in between these worlds. And that's the topic of the exhibit. And so how do each of you feel in regards to printmaking as the creative process? And we can go in whatever order you want.
I think for me, I think as a printer, I would say I identify as a printer. I would say that it's important to be innovative. So how can you push the boundaries of printmaking? I think it's really good to have a foundation in as many practices you have interest in printmaking, but how can you then take that and then make something new? So I think that would be the best way for me to think of being a working artist and incorporating printmaking. But then as say you wanted to open a print shop, there's lots of value in that as well, because artists are always looking for spaces to make and work communally.
Yeah, I think very similar. I identify as a painter, but I'm a mixed media artist. And I think rather than trying to second guess what, you know, if printmaking was the right path, I would just take that skill. It's another asset that then you can take to whatever. There are no boundaries. You don't have to just print. You don't just have to be a printmaker. You can mixed media. There's so many different, you know, once you have the knowledge, you can go forward. So there are no wrongs.
What
Yeah, I
about
think-
you?
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I think for me, I don't, it wasn't until recently that I really started considering myself a printmaker, which is after several thousand square feet of printing. I do have fairly good technical skills and I learned how to do everything properly, but then have sort of iterated upon that and said, okay, I know how to do it properly, but what if I did it this way and what more can I get out of the medium? So a lot of times I'll consider myself like a print media artist or a print artist, but less of a print maker, which I think of more as sort of the perfect replication, you know, registration, all the technical print things.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I have learned so much about your work through this whole process. I am just excited to, I'm going to go back and spend some more time with the exhibit, but thank you all for coming. The exhibit will be on view until October 20th. For more information, please visit the Art Center's website at schweinfurthartcenter.org. Thank you so much to our sponsors and to SACWA for hosting us. This recording will be available on YouTube next week. Next Wednesday, September 11th, Textile Talk hosts Stitch Stories with Emily Tull and Nikki Parameter, I'm sorry, with SACWA. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.